Welcome back out on the mushroom trail. It's another just beautiful spring day, and as you can see, this forest is coming alive. If this is your first time joining us out here on the mushroom trail, this is a channel where we dive into the forest in search of all things fungi. Along the way, we tend to take advantage of foraging opportunities, and we always take time to admire the wonderful nature that surrounds and abounds out here in the forest. So thanks so much for coming along, and if you're liking these videos, take a second, hit that like button, subscribe, stay tuned, let's jump in, let's see what we see. As I move up this lush little trail here, something catching my eye over here. Let's take a look. So it blends in fairly well, especially with all this ground cover. But notice that we've got this, it's got a nice felty cap to it. We can see something's been nibbling off the side of this. We've got a lighter colored margin out here. And boy, that feels just felty smooth. If we take a look underneath, notice that we don't have gills, we've got a pored surface. And interestingly enough, not what I expected in terms of the stipe color. It's actually looking a little white. This is very likely it's actually definitely one of the suede boletes. I would guess it's Xerocomellus atropupureus, although what I will say is this really pronounced light margin or edge of the cap is really indicative oftentimes of the Zeller's bolete, which is a little more rare in this area. It tends to be a more coastal species. A lot of the kind of modern DNA sequencing has found that, this newly described species, the deep purple bolete, Xerocomellus atropupureus, much more common. But let's give it a little tug. It's certainly a little bit blown out. It's been out here for a while. Let's take a look underneath and see what we're looking at. So we can see that stipe originally used to be red. It's sort of faded out a little bit. We also see that, this pore sponge surface is kind of blown out quite a bit. So I suspect that at a younger age, this probably had a more distinct or a little bit of a rougher cap. Someone mentioned in last week's video, I featured one of these that was kind of in a similar state, and you could see the formation of, sort of like a light mold beginning to take over. And the person's comment was really a good one, because it's something that I failed to mention when I was observing that, is that there are a bunch of bolete molds that are oftentimes referred to as the bolete eaters. And these are different fungi that will actually parasitize boletes. And this particular genus, one thing that the commenter mentioned that I thought was really intriguing, is that the Xerocomellus genus, or the suede boletes, will actually host several of these parasitic fungi in the Hypomyces genus, whereas other boletes are likely to be parasitized by Hypomyces chrysospermis. So some of you may be familiar with that genus, the Hypomyces genus, from hunting lobster mushrooms. So come late summer, early fall, that's one of my favorite ones to hunt. It's just such a colorful mushroom, the lobster mushroom. That's actually a result of, in our area, it's generally Rusula brevipes, the, very common mushroom out here that's parasitized by Hypomyces lactiflorum and turns from a pretty boring white mushroom to a bright orange mushroom that's considered a choice edible in these parts. So kind of interesting. So these different molds or fungi that parasitize other fungi are super fascinating. So I'll keep my eye out for that Hypomyces chrysospermis or microspermis. Again, this one can host both of those, chrysospermis and microspermis, whereas the other boletes, if you see kind of a yellowish mold forming or even like a whitish in its early stage, it gets to be a darker yellow. With other boletes, that's very likely to be chrysospermis. But with these ones, you'd need to pull out the microscope to really clearly determine it. So pretty interesting to see Always a beauty. I love finding these a little younger. They're really tasty. As mentioned in previous videos, they've got a little bit of a lemony taste, a really great edible mushroom out here in the springtime in the Pacific Northwest in that deep purple bolete. But this one, far past its prime, still really fun to observe. We can see that something out here in the forest has been enjoying nibbling on this one. I think I'm going to leave it here, let it continue to shed spores and do its thing. But cool to see out here. Love seeing boletes of every kind. And all along this lush kind of trail side, I'm seeing a lot of plants that we've talked about in recent videos. I'm seeing plenty of Siberian miner's lettuce. We're seeing the bleeding heart, beautiful flower starting to kick out those seed pods as referenced. Very cool to see. But I'm also noticing a lot of a plant that we really haven't discussed or talked about yet. So check this one out. So this is a plant that I typically refer to as the Cleavers plant. But this one goes by many, many common names. So including bed straw and sticky bob, sticky willy, at least a dozen other names. This is such an incredible plant. So you can see as I grab this, it's like really clings even to my fingers. So you can see that it's like as I try to pull away from this, it's really latched on there. And the reason why is because this plant has tons of little barbs or hooks on it. So this one is oftentimes thought of as, you know, a weed or a pest in gardens, but it's really an incredible edible and medicinal plant. So when it's in this really young stage, this is a great little salad green. As it starts to mature and get bigger and really develop these hooks that I'm having trouble even pulling away from, it just wraps around my finger and kind of clings as if kind of pulling me into the green mass of plants here. But as it gets a little older, it's not a great edible in terms of like a salad green. But yet this one, in terms of herbal use, is known as a really cooling, anti-inflammatory herb, right? So this is like, has a lot of cooling properties. It also moves the lymph and it really purifies the blood. So this is a favorite of a lot of herbalists that I know. A lot of folks will make good use of this. It's also really high in a lot of nutrition, a lot of minerals, a lot of vitamins. So it's high in vitamin E, vitamin A, vitamin C, all kinds of nutritive properties here. It's also high in silica and different things that tend to do the body good. So really interesting one to note out here. Now, if we look at just kind of a really basic description, so as I referenced a second ago, so this one will really cling to us. So that's one of the key identifying features, of course. It's really hard to make mistake this for something else. Although I will say that, so this is one of the more common ones, but there are a lot of plants in this genus. So there are some that are pretty darn similar that you might mistake with this, but this is the most common one by far. And we can see that it's got these whorls that kind of come out from these little nodes here, and we'll have generally 6 to 8. So if you count these, right, sometimes you'll get 6, sometimes you'll get 7, other times you'll get 8. And eventually they'll develop these small little whitish green flowers that'll have 4 petals on them. And those will ultimately give way to these little burrs or kind of little sticky balls that contain 1 to 3 seeds. Now, if you're like me, you've probably played several games as a young person, or heck, if I'm honest, I think I was throwing these on someone just within the last week. So one of those things that doesn't get old, just kind of sneaking up on someone and letting some of this clinging plant do its thing. Same thing goes with these little burrs or seeds that this will ultimately produce. So those, I'm sure that most of us have the experience of pulling those off of our socks or pant or, whatever kind of clothing gets anywhere close to this. And that same thing applies to animals and wildlife out here. So this is a really effective means for this one to spread its seed, right? So these little burrs will, actually the entire plant, right, will cling to animal fur, and that's a way of it being able to spread and disseminate throughout the forest and find new kind of homes to take root. Now you'll notice that this clings even to itself. So this kind of provides a supportive structure for it to kind of grow and get taller. Also, because it clings to itself, I mentioned one of the common names for this is bed straw. So folks would actually fill bedding materials with this as a historical use. And the reason why is that it would keep it from getting deformed, because the simple fact that it clings to itself would keep it a uniform consistency throughout that bedding material. So that's a pretty interesting one. Also, those little seed pods that we referenced that'll cling to animal fur and human socks and whatnot, those can actually be roasted and used as a coffee substitute, which is kind of interesting. Furthermore, if we were to dig up these roots, you can actually produce a permanent red dye from the roots of this plant. So this thing has such a wide range of use, and really an interesting plant that grows in abundance, super common out here. Now it's also worth noting, so another common name, sometimes people refer to this as the Velcro plant for obvious reasons. And those sticky burrs may remind you of another common plant called burdock. So one thing that's really interesting that a lot of people may or may not be aware of is that the burdock plant, which has a similar kind of little seed or burr that clings to animal fur and humans, so that plant is actually at the root of the actual creation of Velcro. So it's said that in the 1940s, a Swiss inventor got home. I believe that he was out on a duck hunt or something like that, if I recall correctly. But he got back and he was picking these burdock burrs off of his dog's fur. And he was recognizing just the incredible quality that they had to be able to cling to his dog's fur and to his own hand and clothing and whatnot. So this inventor decided to throw those burrs underneath a microscope. And again, this was a long time ago. This was back in the 1940s. And what he observed were these little hooks or barbs that were all over those burdock burrs, similar to what is going on with this plant, right? Both with the leaves and the stems and the little fruits that will form on this plant, the cleaver. So as a result of what he observed under the microscope, he actually invented Velcro. And he came up with this same kind of patterned on nature, right, for these hooks and barbs that creates a material that we're pretty familiar with today. So I always think it's amazing how many kind of inventions and developments are modeled after nature and stuff that's been around for a really long time. Oftentimes we're just simply trying to replicate the things that already exist out here in this wonderful world of nature. So super interesting to note, and just a plant that I always love seeing out here. So super cool to see. This is one that if you don't know it, I would recommend that you get to know it. It's such an incredible plant as a spring green. Some people will even juice this and prepare all kinds of different medical, functioning little decoctions and infusions and different things. One other thing that's worth noting is that, in different parts of Europe in the past, folks would get these plants and they would create a sort of sieve. So notice how it all sticks together. So they'd take these square stemmed stalks and they'd actually strain milk with this. And that milk would then oftentimes become infused with some of the medicinal properties of this incredible plant. So I've heard of Greek shepherds doing that, as well as folks up in Sweden. And I believe that that's a practice that's still taking place today, to strain milk with this particular plant. So really incredible one. If you don't know it, next time you're out here, get to know this one. Maybe if you're out there with a buddy or a friend, see how many of these you can get stuck to the back of his or her shirt before they notice. It's always a fun game to play and just a really cool plant to get to know. And moving just up the trail here, boy, it's crazy how alive this forest has become. Got all the bird song and all just kind of the lush greenery that comes with springtime. Out here in the Pacific Northwest, here we've got an old familiar friend. This is the Panther Cap, Amanita pantherinoides. We've discussed this at length in other videos, so I won't go into great detail right now. But we see a white gilled mushroom. We can see the remnants of a partial veil down there, hanging from there. And if we dig down at the base of this, we'll surely see a cup structure, a universal veil that this Amanita was born out of. So always fun to see out here, and such a beautiful part of the forest. These are just everywhere out here right now. So cool to see. Favorite little springtime sight out here, Panther Cap. And moving just down the trail here, aside from another beautiful Panther Cap, Amanita pantherinoides, nice distinct annulus or ring, remnants of the partial veil. Aside from that, if we look a little further up the trail, we've got a really cool mushroom that caught my eye growing right out of the trail here. Take a look at this one. So this is one that we featured, several videos back, maybe even a couple months ago. This is what's known as the tiger's eye, Coltricia perennis. This is an incredible mushroom. If I can get a look underneath, let me actually just tilt that back. So you'll notice this isn't a gilled mushroom, but rather a polypore. And you can see those pores beginning to run down the stipe. Now, one thing that's unique about this particular polypore, it's got this tough, kind of woody, fibrous texture. The top feels a little suede-like, almost like tanned leather or something. But this is just an incredible mushroom for the simple fact that it's one of those rare polypores that's believed to be ectomycorrhizal. So most of the polypores that we see out here are saprophytes. They're saprophytic mushrooms that kind of thrive off of decaying and rotting wood, whereas this one actually has connections with the roots of different trees. So they've got a symbiotic relationship where they're doing a little bit of a nutrient exchange, which is exceedingly rare for polypores. So kind of a cool one to see. Just figured I'd pause to point that out. Beautiful to look at. You can see where it gets its common name, the tiger's eye. It kind of has that weird little kind of layered or banded look. Depending on the angle too that you're viewing this from, sometimes it's more pronounced than at other times. But very cool to see. That's the tiger's eye, Coltricia perennis. And just feet down the trail, we've got another good example. You can see this one a little further along, so you can see how it's kind of curled up. Another common name for this, aside from the tiger's eye, is the brown funneled polypore. And you can see why. It's got that funnel shape. Again, pores running down the stipe. Beautiful to look at. Moving just up the trail here, at the base of this red alder snag, it's been heavily worked on by the pileated woodpecker. A small little beautiful sight caught my eye just down here. Let's zoom in and let's take a look at what we've got going on down here. Look at this guy. This is what's commonly referred to as the orange bonnet. Other times it's referred to as the coral spring Mycena. This is Mycena acicula. Boy, just look at that. Isn't that beautiful? Those colors are just phenomenal. We've got this one guy out here all by his lonesome, but looking quite stunning. We notice that we've got this really distinct, just beautiful colored cap. This is a really small mushroom, as is the case with most Mycena. I believe that that's You know, if you look at the Latin name for this genus and you break it down, Mycena, I think essentially translates to small mushrooms. So there are a ton of these. They can sometimes be tough to differentiate. But on this one, I believe that that's what we're looking at, this orange bonnet or coral spring Mycena. And it's got this really just particularly stunning cap, just beautiful to look at. And kind of a yellowish stipe that looks almost translucent, or, you know, it's got a little bit of an iridescent sheen to it, just like this cap. And we see the sun hitting that just right. Beautiful to see. What a stunner. And just across the trail from this beautiful little Mycena, saw something else that was catching my eye. This is really a bit of a hot spot for mushrooms over here. There's a lot going on. Got a lot of bird activity too. I'm hearing the rufous hummingbird and bald eagles, all kinds of cool stuff happening here in the background. But check this out. So growing off of this down little log, we've got a really fresh little fruiting body of oyster mushrooms. This is the Pleurotus genus. We can see that these are just getting their start. And you may remember in videos past, last week's video in particular, I pointed out a huge flush of just massive oyster mushrooms. And I referenced the idea that, you know, even though those are really fun to see, those great big ones, I tend to prefer the smaller little fruitings that are just starting to pop out. So this might be one that I check back on in a day or two to see what it's looking like, see if it's coming along. Sometimes these younger fruitings can be a little bit less buggy and a little bit more enjoyable to consume. So we can see all kinds of little pins starting to poke their head out. And these are, you know, if you get them at the right time, great edible. Also has some medicinal qualities, which I think is pretty cool. So always love seeing the Pleurotus genus out here. That's the oyster mushroom. So moving just up the trail here, check this guy out. So cool. So this isn't actually a mushroom. This is a slime mold. This is what's typically referred to as chocolate tube slime mold. Just beautiful. Look at that. So you can see all those spore bodies that have been kicked off by this fruiting body of the slime mold that we call a sporangia, right? So these little tube-like structures. Let's zoom in here and take an even closer look. Boy, just look at that. Really something. And so these guys, these slime molds, just such fascinating little beings. We've talked about several different species here in past videos, and I always love bumping into these. So oftentimes when I'm out mushroom hunting, almost every day that I'm mushroom hunting, in fact, I'll tend to come across a slime mold or two. These are all over out here in the forest, scouring the forest floor. Oftentimes when they're in their kind of feeding state, they're feeding on small little bacteria and fungi and different things. And when they get to this state, they're actually in the repopulation phase of sporing out and creating new life, similar to what we observe with mushrooms. But again, totally different little beings. Part of their life is spent as more amoeba-like single-celled structures that roam the forest. This is the chocolate tube slime mold, Stemonitis splendens. Boy, just beautiful to look at. So all along the trail here, we've got some nettle in various states. What I'm really after are these young ones, just to snip those tops. But even these ones that are a little bigger, I'll just come right through here and maybe just take this top little portion. I've got some scissors with me, so I'll just give it a little snip. And a lot of times I'll do that to an entire patch, right? Whatever I'm interested in harvesting here. And then I'll come back through at the end and pick up all my cuttings. That's just kind of an efficient way, if you hit a reasonably sized patch, to kind of come through and harvest this. So as I referenced before, I've been getting a little bit low on my stinging nettle supply. So I'm going to go ahead and harvest a little bit of this and start to fill a bag. And just a quick review real quick for identification on the stinging nettle, Urtica dioica. So we see these sharply serrated leaves. We've also got opposite leaves, so they're growing opposite of one another. We'll see that all the way up and down this. And you may also be noticing those little stinging hairs. If you have any doubt about this one, sometimes identification of this is kind of laughable because one touch on this, you can see back here some of those stinging hairs. If you touch those, you'll definitely know whether or not you've got the right plant, because those contain formic acid. And as noted in other videos, those will pack a little bit of a punch. They'll definitely get your attention, especially on some of these older plants. When they're young, you can actually touch them and not necessarily get stung. But as they age a little bit more, those are gonna produce a more significant punch, or pack a more significant punch if you do get stung by them. So I've actually got some gloves with me today because I'm planning on harvesting quite a bit. And you can see back here all different kind of sizes. So this is a little bigger. We basically want to get to these before they start to flower. And the flowering can be somewhat subtle on these because they're just like really inconspicuous kind of green flowers that will just kind of start to drop out of these middle pieces and hang down kind of in a little bit of a spray. So anyhow, these older ones, I'm just going to harvest the very top, with the exception of I might get some for cordage just to kind of demonstrate how that works. So I'll keep an eye out for some especially big ones. But one other really quick thing, if we look down at this stinging nettle, I just wanted to point out here, so we talked a little bit about this bleeding heart, just a beautiful spring flower that we see out here. And this is kind of cool. You can start to see these seed pods beginning to form outside or drop out of the flowers. So those contain the seeds. So I just wanted to point that out. I've been seeing that more and more as we get further into the spring. And as we look at all these other bleeding hearts, you can see some of them are still bearing the flowers, right, that we referenced in previous videos. But several of them are starting to transform into that next stage. So cool to see. Everything's changing so quickly out here this time of year. Always a joy to just kind of note the ebb and the flow. Cool stuff. I'm gonna get to picking. And we'll see what we can do about filling this bag with more and more stinging nettle. So just a second ago, I referenced the stinging nettle flowers. And check this out, here we go with the very beginnings of these flowers. So you can see they're fairly nondescript, they don't really stand out, they're not really easy to notice. And so when I start to see that coming out on these stinging nettles, that's when I tend to kind of move on to the next plant, because at that point, the chemistry in these plants is changing somewhat considerably. Now, it wouldn't be the end of the world. I wouldn't be, freaking out or anything if I accidentally harvested some that had flowered. Not a huge deal, but the chemistry is changing. So I'm more going for these little guys, and I just wanted to point out what those flowers look like because, as I mentioned before, they're fairly, nondescript, not super noticeable. It'd be easy to miss. But when you start seeing these real kind of more pronounced leaves and bigger structure and just more kind of stout, mature plants, you want to look closely because we're really going for the young, fresh ones. So be somewhat selective, especially if you've got a big grove or patch like I'm seeing out here in the woods today. You can kind of pick and choose and go for the cream of the crop, so to speak. So just wanted to pause to point that out. So one other really cool thing that I just wanted to take a quick second to point out is, of course, as I'm harvesting this nettle, even though I've got a glove on, I can't help but sting up my wrists. And, it's just part of the process. You're going to get some stings from stinging nettle. So kind of a cool thing that you'll oftentimes see growing near stinging nettle is a really common plant that I'm sure is a common sight to several of you watching. This is what's known as common plantain, Plantago major. And there's several different, plants that are all kind of go under that general genus or common name of plantain. And they're going to tend to have these super deep veins. We can see if we turn this over, you can see those really pronounced veins. This is a really typical plant that you see in fields and disturbed areas, along trail sides, things like that. The cool thing about this, and the fact that it oftentimes grows in close proximity to the nettle, is that if you do get a sting and you're not appreciating that little bite of formic acid, you can actually take one of these leaves and you can actually kind of mush it up until it kind of releases a little bit of its moisture or its juices. And this is a really great way to kind of soothe that sting or that burn. So it's kind of a good one to know. When I did used to work with a lot of kids teaching naturalist skills and ethnobotany, survival, that kind of stuff, a lot of times if they'd find their way into a patch of stinging nettle and get stung up and it was not sitting well with them, I would oftentimes seek this plant out and just kind of get it just the way it is right now. You can tell that that's really pretty juicy and secreting those fluids. And if you rub that on that portion that's been burned, it'll offer at least some relief. So depended on the student we were treating, how much it appeased their pain or worry, but I find that it gives me quite a bit of relief. So just a cool one to be aware of. This is also an interesting kind of edible plant. It's not one that I typically seek out other than to kind of deal with stings and stuff, but a super cool plant that's really good to know, also edible. So that's the broadleafed plantain, Plantago major. Cool to see. And moving just up the trail here, boy, look at this, can't miss it. Hiding back here off the trail, let's go investigate this yellow blob that's growing off of what appears to be a red alder log. Looks like it was a standing dead wood, a snag that's recently fallen. Look at what we've got here. Just beautiful. This is another true slime mold, plasmoidal slime mold, that's got a really interesting name. This is commonly referred to as dog vomit slime mold. Look at that, just beautiful. The dog vomit slime mold in all of its splendor, just look at that. So you can see that kind of plasmoidal slimy mass under there giving way to the sporangia, the spore-bearing surface here. It is this yellow blob that we see, so that's meant to spread or disseminate spores all over the forest. Boy, these Myxomycetes, the true slime molds, are just fascinating little beings. And just down the trail from the dog vomit slime mold, look what we've got over here. Yet another true slime mold. This is one we featured in previous videos. Take a look at this as I zoom in here. Just beautiful. This is what's commonly referred to as the honeycomb coral slime mold. And we see it just in abundance here. Just a beautiful sight. And just up from that, we see one that we featured in recent videos. So this is a Hypholoma, certainly. Let's take a look. We're gonna give it a little bit of a tug. We see it's got this bright yellow look to it. Let's bring this up and take a look. So you can see that this is sort of a very bright yellow color, just as we've done in videos past. So I'm gonna pull out real quick. I've got a 365 nanometer UV flashlight. Give me a second to pull that out of the pocket. I tend to carry this around with me for just this occasion. Let's get a little splash of light on this and see what it does. So yeah, look at that. Boy, just glowing, beautiful neon green. This is the electrons contained in these aromatic carbon rings that are getting excited, jumping up in orbitals to an excited state, and as they come back down to a ground state or a resting state, they're releasing energy in the form of this light that's fluorescing. So super cool to see. Just a real beauty. Every time I see this, I love stopping to admire these Hypholoma fasciculari, the sulphur tuft. Now it's good to be able to differentiate this from its edible counterpart, Hypholoma capnoides, the conifer tuft. This one, the sulphur tuft, is fairly toxic. It won't kill you necessarily, but it will make you really, really sick. So it's not a good one to consume by any stretch. And it's really great to be able to recognize it out here and to positively identify it. A lot of times people will pass on the conifer tuft or the smoky-gilled Hypholoma. Those are different common names for Hypholoma capnoides. A lot of times they'll pass on it for, you know, just the risk of confusing it possibly with the sulphur tuft. So one is edible, the other one very inedible, and in fact toxic. But what a beautiful one. A lot of times this will grow in abundance. So it's worth noting that this sulphur tuft will grow on either conifer or hardwood. It doesn't seem to mind. It'll grow on either one, whereas the conifer tuft, or Hypholoma capnoides, as the common name implies, will only grow on conifer wood. So sometimes that can be an easy way to rule out the edible conifer tuft if you're seeing it growing on hardwood. So, and we can see that there's some small little mites or bugs having a field day under there. So we'll leave them there, we'll let them do their thing, but just wanted to pause to appreciate the beauty of this one, the sulphur tuft, in all its splendor here, doing its thing. Cool to see. And moving just up the trail here, we see off just to the side here on this red alder snag, a really increasingly common sight this time of year, springtime out here in the Pacific Northwest, on all of the hardwoods that are out here. This is no stranger here. This is a nice fruiting of true oyster mushrooms. This is the Pleurotus genus. And as referenced a second ago, if we look up even higher, so this is actually well out of reach, we see quite a bit more fruiting up there. Those are nice, kind of smaller, younger fruiting bodies. But we can see the top of that snag has actually snapped off. And if we look over here, we've got quite the flush of Pleurotus down here. So this is a great edible wild mushroom. Tends to get a little bit buggy. And just looking at the swarms of different gnats and whatnot out here, I suspect that these carry their fair share of insect activity. But we can see all up and down this log, we've got plenty of this. And even further out down there, it just doesn't stop. So this is a great source of protein. It's one of the highest mushroom sources of protein that you'll find out here, if not the highest. And it's also kind of interesting because, as noted in videos past, this is one of those mushrooms that's actually, oddly enough, carnivorous. So these will actually attract nematodes and then consume those nematodes as a nitrogen source. So especially in areas where nitrogen might be somewhat deficient, this mushroom tends to do really well by preying upon the insects that it attracts and the other kind of animal forms, namely the nematode. So kind of interesting to see this out here and to know that this is not just an incredible food source, but it's also something that's incredibly good for us. We referenced last week some of the medicinal capabilities and uses that are being tested in different trials, and a lot of potential here. We don't tend to always think of food as medicine, but I think that's a mistake. I think it's really cool to be able to look at our food as medicine as well. And this is a prime example of something that fills both of those niches or both of those roles really, really well. Cool to see out here. It's the oyster mushroom, Pleurotus genus. Moving just up the trail here, you'll notice that off to both sides of the trail here, we've got a downed big leaf maple. I always think that that's interesting substrate, right, to check for different saprophytes and things. This one might be a little fresh. Oh, but notice what we've got right here. So boy, this is certainly the day of the Myxomycetes, the true slime molds. This is one of my all-time favorite slime molds to encounter. So you can see this one has been out there for a while. So you can see the color is almost like kind of a brownish color on a lot of them. Some are more like a kind of a brighter salmon or pinkish color. This is what's commonly referred to as wolf's milk, Lycogala epidendrum. If I go in and actually pop this, check this out. You may have recalled seeing that on past videos, so just wild. So this is the fruiting body of a true slime mold, and this is the sporangia, right, or the spore producing body. So that little liquid there is full of spores. This one in particular is being researched for, I believe, everything from cosmetics to different kind of bioactive compounds that might have medicinal capabilities. So super interesting one that's still, there's more questions than answers, but boy, I love seeing this one out here. And this is just a very small little fruiting. I'm gonna let it do its thing out here, but just kind of had to stop to pause to admire it. I'm gonna poke around actually and see if I can find a more substantial fruiting, but super cool to see. So the Myxomycetes continue to be well represented out here today. Cool to see. And wow, take a look at this. So standing out here right in the sun, boy, I easily would have missed this if the sun weren't hitting it just right. Take a look at what we've got here. Beautiful fruiting all up this well-decayed, kind of decomposing log here. We've got a very fresh fruiting of what I believe is Gyromitra esculenta. It's in the very early stages, right? So this one, an ascomycete, closely related to the morels. This is actually quite a toxic mushroom. Best avoided, sometimes confused with morels, and you can kind of see why. If we were to cut that open, it would be somewhat hollow, but also much more convoluted and complex than our Morchella species. So just amazing to see out here, very cool. It's the Gyromitra genus. Here's a real small one, so you can see this kind of folding back on itself. Really interesting to see. That one was kind of just growing out in front of it, but it's almost got sort of like a brain-like little folding or kind of structure here. I believe that this is just in that young stage, but you know, this is one that I'll keep an eye on. I'll pop back here in a couple days, just kind of see what it's looking like. But I have a sneaking suspicion that this is going to get much, much bigger, and that it'll reveal that kind of real brain-like kind of folding and lobing pattern that we so frequently associate with this one. Boy, just a beauty though. Awesome to see. Moving just up the trail here, check this out. This is a cool sight to see off to the side of the trail. So we've been seeing lots of different amanitas recently. This one you'll notice has almost like a golden yellow appearance. I believe that what we're looking at here is the jeweled amanita, Amanita gemata. And you can see that it's kind of got this yellowish look to it. If I dig down here, you can see, boy, some of the remnants of the partial veil, it looks like, that fell off to the side there. And if I dig deeper, let's see if we can see underneath there. We're going to eventually see, well, it may be pretty far down there, but there will be the universal veil, will be all the way down there at the bottom, that cup-like vulva structure, and the partial veil underneath. Let's see if we can get a glimpse underneath. Boy, the cap is kind of sticky. It's got a sticky feel to it. That's one of the things that's very common with these. So it's got a sticky feel. You can see the remnants of the universal veil up on the cap as those white warts. Very cool to see. Amanita gemata. Let's give this thing a little tug. So I was torn. I was wanting to leave it in the ground, but I also want to take a look underneath at what this looks like. Boy, just beautiful white gills. You can see that unique connection, and boy, underneath that we could see the remnants of the partial veil, but here you can't really see it. If I look down at where we pulled that or removed it out of, so again, here was the kind of remnant of the gill covering, and if we look really far down there, there's that cup or that vulva structure. So, you know, when I pulled this up by its stipe, that cup was not connected. Let me actually grab that so you all can see what that looks like underneath. So again, this is very distinct feature of these amanitas, is that they're born within this universal veil that totally encapsulates or encloses it at a young age, and then it'll give rise out of that. And that one came quite a way, so that's quite far down there. We can see a lot of the mycelium down there, those little hyphal threads crawling through the soil. So cool to see. I love these amanitas. A great family or genus to be able to recognize out here. So very cool to see a different one. We've seen lots of the Panther Cap, and now we see this jeweled amanita as well. So awesome to see out here. Moving just up the trail here, I see a really cool one that we featured in videos past, but not recently. So you can see all up and down this little stick, we've got these kind of cup-like structures. In fact, you might compare them to little nests. And that's how these ones get their name. So these are the bird's nest fungi. There are several species that look pretty similar. I'm guessing that this one is most likely Nidula nivio-tomentosa, the woolly bird's nest. We can see that little wool or fibrous kind of stuff on the outer edge. When these are younger, they'll have a gel-like matrix inside, and they'll contain little eggs of their own. The fancy name for those, we call those perennis. And boy, just such a cool little mushroom to look at. Look at those. So these are all empty nesters. So no perennials or no little eggs to speak of, but we can see that woolly little outside covering. So these ones are, you know, not really active at this stage, but you can see that this cup-like structure will persist beyond the time where it's actually producing these spore bodies, these perennials. So, and this has a really kind of firm structure. It kind of feels almost sort of like a foam or something, and this will stick around for a really long time. We can see evidence of those down there as well. A lot of times these perennials that are the nest eggs, right, that sit inside of these nests, they'll wait for a raindrop to come to propel and launch the perennial out of the nest. So that's kind of their way that they kind of spread. So kind of interesting that these will, you know, launch these little perennials out of the nest, but they tend to not get too far from the nest unless, you know, they cling to different animals or birds or the like. So a lot of times you'll get these clustered little groups or colonies like what we're seeing right here. So cool to see. Keep your eyes peeled for these. One of my favorites out here, bird's nest fungus. Cool to see. And boy, I was just busy harvesting this little patch of nettle off to the side of the trail here, and I glanced up and I saw a really cool sight. So this is a plant that we featured last week, one of my all-time favorite native plants out here. This is the vanilla leaf, Aclis triphylla. And as noted last week, so these can be harvested and dried out. They'll have no scent right now, but as the common name implies, they'll have a just incredible vanilla aroma to them once they dry out, which can be used as an insecticide or a mosquito or fly repellent. But I just wanted to pause because the thing that's changed since the last time that we saw this is that it's really started to flower out. Look at these beautiful flowers. So you can see lacking petals and just solely consisting of these white stamens. So again, just to repeat from last week, that genus Aclis translates to mist. And that is believed to be a reference to the flowers that kind of come off of this one, just kind of being likened to a mist rising above the green foliage. And we can see more of that up here. Just beautiful. Such a cool native plant growing in abundance here underneath cedar. Super cool to see, one of my all-time favorites. Wow, so look at this, just off the trail here, I see this super dense cluster of little brown mushrooms. And as many of you know, little brown mushrooms best avoided. Several weeks back, we featured the funeral bell, which was growing on a cottonwood. This is actually a western hemlock that this bunch is growing off of. And ironically, this is one that's typically referred to as the false funeral bell, Hypomyces lignicola. This one, you'll notice, has a very slight or altogether is lacking the ring. Under some of these, I can detect remnants of a partial veil, and you'll notice that the stipe is dark in color. Now, these are still pretty moist. There we see the spore color left on the cap there. If this were to dry out a little bit, we'd notice it's even more hygrophonous than we can currently see. But this one definitely best just left alone out here, but a joy to see. So that's the false funeral bell, also sometimes referred to as the redhead. So moving just up the trail here, we've got a patch of suede boletes, the deep purple boletes that was right here situated last week. These are the ones that I didn't harvest, and I figured this would be a perfect opportunity to dive deeper on the Hypomyces species that are known collectively as the bolete eaters or the bolete molds. So notice how these are kind of giving way to this almost slight yellowish kind of moldy growth. In fact, if I look just back here, this is an even better example. Let me pull this out here. Oh yeah, so take a look at this. This is a great example of Hypomyces taking over a Xerocomellus or suede bolete, Xerocomellus atropupureus. Now, as noted by that viewer last week, that was such an astute observation that, you know, I showed a deep purple bolete that was far along in the process of decay. Not as far along as these ones, but you could see that it was starting to like mold underneath. And this is an excellent opportunity to kind of weave in what he referenced, that one of the things that makes these suede boletes different from some of the other ones is that they'll host several different parasitic fungi, all in the Hypomyces genus. Whereas other boletes are pretty much a shoe-in, as far as we know, for Hypomyces chrysospermis. So whereas this one could be any one of a couple that I know of, Microspermis being another one that's in the Hypomyces genus. But you can see this powdery kind of moldy deal. This is another mushroom parasitizing that bolete. So very cool to see out here. Again, if you've got knowledge or information, I love when people share what they know or kind of weave in a story or insights or things that they're seeing out their way. So if you're watching these videos ever and you say, you know, there's something that you have to add to the conversation, boy, those comments are an excellent place to do that. And I love continuing to learn from all of you. So feel free, if you've got some insight, drop it in there. So check this out, just up here on the side of the trail, we've got a somewhat familiar site here, just growing off of big leaf maple branch back here. It's a really cool site. This is one of the witch's butters, and there's several different genus and species that go by the same common name. This one, because of the simple fact that it's growing here on this big leaf maple branch, that tells me that it's likely the Tremella genus, whereas the ones that grow off of coniferous wood, namely Douglas fir, that tends to be Dacromyces. So interesting to see out here, cool view of the witch's butter. This is one of those ones that's edible raw right off the stick. Can't say that I'm gonna be munching on this one today, but you can see that this growth pattern almost looks somewhat brain-like. The way that it's folded back on itself, just a real beauty to look at and to admire out here. So cool to see. That's the witch's butter. So check this out. I'm just off trail right now, and I'm underneath some hazelnuts and a great big leaf maple here. We can see that the bulk of it is laying over here. That's actually half of the tree. This is kind of cool. This is all hollowed out inside, as tends to happen with a lot of these older trees. But look at what caught my eye under here. This is so cool. Look at these just huge shelves that dropped off of these. I believe that these are all prime examples of the artist conch. Ganoderma applanatum. Look at those. So the size of this, just for scale, here's my hand. So I mean, this thing was just huge. And we can see how it's got this kind of like stacked pancake look on the side. Obviously going through its decay process right now, but just massive. We can see where one was right here. I believe that that's this one, because we can see a similar kind of break pattern over there. And then that great big kind of monstrous one, I suspect, was right up there. And that's probably the little scar from where it fell off, but super cool to see. And then glancing just down here, we've got a cool example of one that we've referenced or discussed in the past. Let's go take a quick peek at that. So this is actually the deer mushroom, Pleurotus cervinus. This one's edible, but far from choice. Not one that I typically look to forage. You can see it's got slightly furry little cap. It's gonna have light pink spores, which you can kind of detect slightly on those gills. This is what's typically referred to in Europe, or was historically referred to, as a war mushroom. Super cool to learn that from some of the folks that commented on videos past. So in times of need, this was one that would be foraged because it could be found in, in abundance and in weight when other mushrooms that were edible were relatively sparse. So not a great tasting mushroom by most people's accounts or opinions. So it's said to taste a bit like kind of radishes. So it's got a radish aftertaste. So interesting one to see though, Pleurotus cervinus. And boy, as we look around in here, I can see more remnants, like this one, even older yet, this artist conch. Let's actually look down this piece that's fallen. I still can't get over the size of that. That's just phenomenal. We've got a little cluster of hazelnuts here. It's the tree that I seek out when I'm looking for candy caps in the kind of winter seasons. But check this out. So as we move down this log, I see some artist conch that seem to still be doing their thing up here. Let's take a quick peek at this. Yeah, so still attached anyways. We can see sometimes they really get that stacking pattern. Sometimes when that happens, we'll kind of identify these differently as Ganoderma browni. But very interesting to see, growing off a big leaf maple, really cool one, the artist conch. So when this is actually fresh, let's actually take a look at this one. Yeah, so I can tell that this is definitely not fresh, just the way that it's kind of crunching in. When it is fresh, it'll have white spore body or spore surface underneath, and you can just, you know, just moving your nail across it will leave a mark. So a lot of times people will perform different pieces of art and on those and then set them aside, and it'll kind of preserve whatever has been applied to that. So kind of a cool one, but interesting to see. Never know what you're gonna find when you get off trail. So check this out, moving just up the trail, something's catching my eye back there. Take a look at that. Looks like another Amanita, but an Amanita that's different than the Panther Cap. We've been seeing tons of Amanita pantherinoides out here this week. But boy, that looks different. Let's get in and take a little bit of a closer look and see what we see. Boy, look at this, just beautiful. We've got that white cap. We can see those small little warts or remnants of the universal veil up top there. Underneath, we've got this really pronounced skirt. That's the remnants of the partial veil. We refer to that as the annulus. And then as we peek underneath, we see, to no surprise, white gills, another hallmark of the Amanita mushrooms. If we take a look down the stipe, and we kind of peel this back, I suspect that we're going to see a cup or a vulva that this is growing out of. Yep, and there we go. We can see that little cup layer. That's the vulva or the remnant of the universal veil that this grew from. So, boy, just beautiful to see. Entirely different from that Panther Cap that we've been seeing so frequently out here. What a beauty. Just standing out here all by its lonesome. So cool to see.